Hi everyone, welcome to my first video. My name is Julie and today I'm going to be talking about the best books that I read last year in 2021. I thought this would be a good video to start my channel off with because it wraps up my reading year and gets me ready for the next one, this year I guess, and also it gives you guys as the viewers a chance to see what I like to read, what I enjoy, and if we're a good reading sort of match. I have 10 books I want to talk about, so I'll keep the intro pretty short, but 2 disclaimers I want to talk about and just get out of the way. First, these are my favorite books that I read in 2021, not my favorite books that were published in 2021. And second, that this may not be my true list of favorites because I like to keep my wrap up at the end of the year pretty genre diverse, just because not everyone likes fiction, not everyone likes poetry, and I want to make sure there's something that's kind of maybe interesting for everyone. Also, I know that some people really like to read fiction, but they want to try getting into like manga or memoirs or something like that, so this gives them a good starting point. And with that out of the way real quick, I'm just gonna get started. So the first genre I want to talk about is fiction because it is the genre that I read the most of, and that's probably what most people are here for anyway. But the first fiction book I'm going to talk about is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal El-Mohtar. This is a sapphic, enemies to lovers, light sci-fi novel that follows these two agents in a journey across time and space as they're kind of trying to sabotage each other, but they accidentally kind of fall in love. So basically, when the story starts, we are in the future, and it's at this point in time where humanity has learned how to time travel, and there are 2 opposing factions, and both of them send agents back into the past to try and alter the course of history so that their faction comes out on top, gains an upper hand, is essentially victorious in the war that's happening in the current time period, which is the future. So there are these 2 agents, red and blue. They are both the top agents of their respective faction, and they just start getting to know each other because one of them leaves a letter for the other one to read. And it's kind of a taunt at first, but it ends up becoming so much more because they start exchanging letters back and forth, and through that they start to develop feelings for each other. But it's complicated because they're supposed to be enemies, and there's always this lingering question of, will they betray each other? Is it like, who are they really betraying and why are they fighting this for if they have these intense feelings for each other? It's super beautiful, beautiful writing, and it's also a really quick read. I think it's only like 200 pages. The one thing to note with a sci-fi novel is that there's not a lot of world building. That can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your feelings about sci-fi, but I thought that it was okay because that's not really the point of the book. It's kind of like that sci-fi time travel element is like the backdrop of the story, which is the relationship between these 2 opposing forces. And it's not necessarily about like the technology behind everything that's going on. So all in all, a great book, super quick, and if you want beautiful writing with a fun little plot, I think this will be good for you. The next book I want to talk about is Bunny by Mona Awad, which is a pretty controversial book in terms of people either love it or hate it. Obviously it made it to my best of books list, so I love it, but let me tell you a little bit more about what it's about before you decide for yourself. So this essentially follows a woman named Samantha Mackey, and she is an MFA creative writing student. She focuses on fiction at this elite New England sort of college, and the only other people in her program are these 4 other women that she calls the bunnies because they call each other Bunny. They don't use their names, they call each other Bunny, and they use it all the time. So they'll say like, oh Bunny, I loved your fiction piece today, or oh Bunny, I absolutely love your outfit. And it's all just kind of in this really childish, like girlish manner of speaking, and it drives Samantha crazy. Like, she's disgusted by them all the time. But the thing is that they're the only other people in her program, so they're the only other people she has to interact with, and because she doesn't like them and they don't really like her, her experience is not so great. She's just lonely and just like not having a good time. One day, though, the bunnies decide to issue her an invitation to their off-campus party/writing workshop, which is called the Smut Salon. And the thing is that Samantha goes, even though she doesn't like these girls at all because, like I said, she's lonely and she's also curious. She just wants to see, like, what are these girls up to? So she ends up going, and she ends up finding herself being drawn more and more into this world that they've built and that she becomes a part of. And from there, she's really forced to make some tough decisions about like her writing, what she wants, what she believes to be true, and also choosing between the bunnies and her one friend that she had before she met the bunnies named Ava, and like who in the end is she, you know, most connected with. It was a really good book. I thought it's a good mix of like dark academia, cult book, satire, black humor. I really love the way that Mona Awad writes and makes us question what is real and what isn't, and if that even matters in a way. She also writes really like great female relationships and just like friendships and how tender those can be. It was just a really good book. If you have, like, if any of that sounds interesting to you, I think you should read it. But also, if you ever took creative writing classes in college, I think that this is kind of a must read just because a lot of it will be really relatable to you. Just sometimes the things that happen in writing workshops are so weird. And this kind of like taps into that and how the writing process can just be like altered and twisted too, and yeah, it was just a good one. Overall, 10 out of 10 recommend. The last fiction book that I'm going to talk about is my favorite book that I read this entire past year, actually, and it is The Song of Achilles. If you talk to me about books at all in the past year, or even just in general, I've probably mentioned this book because I love it so much. As the name suggests, it follows the Greek mythological hero Achilles. It's a retelling of his story or an expansion told through the eyes of Patroclus. Patroclus, when we first meet him, is the shy, quiet kind of guy. His father is really disappointed in him because he's not a good fighter. He's just not what like a Greek man is supposed to be. And that leaves Patroclus feeling pretty resentful and self-conscious, and it leads him to make this decision that alters his life, and his father exiles him from his kingdom, and he goes to live with Achilles instead because Achilles' father kind of like takes an orphan. So he goes to live there with Achilles, and Achilles is everything he's not. Achilles is golden and radiant and charismatic, and Patroclus is like, you know, there's no chance we're even gonna be friends, we're just too different. But Achilles wants to get to know him, and the two of them eventually become friends, and later on that friendship kind of develops and deepens into love too, and they are partners basically in every sense of the word. Unfortunately though, the Trojan War is looming, and Achilles, as the best of the best of the Greeks, he is going to be called to fight, and Patroclus isn't a fighter, and that is kind of weighing on them the whole time. So this is very much a retelling, but it's not full of history. It's more of like a zoomed in focus on this relationship between these two characters. And the reason why I love this book so much is because you can feel Achilles and Patroclus's like love and respect for each other so much. And I've just never felt that between two characters in a book before. In any type of media, really, there's always, you know, relationships and romance that's happening, but it never really means that much to me. I have characters that I enjoy and ship together and root for, but I don't feel like their love really exists as its own separate entity, and I felt that in this book. I immediately reread this after reading it for the first time because I was just so distrustful of my own feelings about it. I was like, it can't be that good, you know? But I reread it and I cried again, and I was like, okay, it's definitely just an excellent book all around. If you read the Percy Jackson series as a kid like I did and really liked that world, I think this book is something fun to pick up as an adult, and you can like enter that world again, but in a different, like less childish mindset, and not childish in a bad way. I love Percy Jackson, but it's just a different take on the same world, and it was really fun to see. Okay, moving on to the next genre that I'm going to be talking about, and that is nonfiction and memoirs. The first book that I'll be talking about is one that has been pretty popular throughout the past year, and that is Crying in H-Mart by Michelle Zauner, aka the indie pop artist Japanese Breakfast. So in this memoir, she's basically grappling with her mother's terminal cancer and her ultimate death and grief, alongside questions of her racial and cultural identity. So Michelle Zauner is half white, half Korean, and her mom was really her link to her Korean aspect of her identity and how she felt connected to her Korean roots. And without her mother gone, obviously she's missing her mother just for who she is and her existence and her presence, but also for what she symbolized in Michelle's own life and how that kind of link to her Korean culture and identity is missing a little bit now, and how she has to refine that for herself. This memoir is full of so much beautiful writing, a lot of great food writing if you like that too, because that is how she sort of reconnects with her Korean culture. And it's just the most raw memoir that I have read in a long time, maybe even ever, just with how she isn't afraid to shy away from some of the ugly parts of grief and the way that she deals with her mother's death, because that is not ever a pretty process for anyone, and she's not afraid to go into what it's like and what she was going through. One scene that really stuck out to me was when her mother was sick and Michelle was taking care of her, and she needed a break, like all caregivers need a break too because it can be exhausting. And one of her mother's friends flew in and they were just like having a good time together, and Michelle didn't feel like this was restful for her in any way. She actually felt jealous and kind of resentful of this friend because she felt like it was her duty as a daughter to be there to take care of her mother, and now someone else was kind of like inserting themselves into this situation, and she wasn't grateful for it at the moment. And I think that's a really normal thing to feel in her situation, but a lot of people wouldn't want to admit that and put it into a book any less. So just little things like that really stood out to me and made this not only an impactful memoir, but one that was full of like great writing too. And it is also really sad, obviously, so you have to be in the right headspace for it, but I would still recommend it for sure. Okay, the next nonfiction book I'm going to talk about is A History of My Brief Body by Billy Ray Belcourt. This book is a mix of memoir, essay, and manifesto in which Belcourt talks about his experiences living as a queer native Indian from the Drift Powell Cree Nation in Canada. And his kind of thesis of the book is about the future, and the future of queer native Indians and also queer people in general. So thinking about this book and a lot of what he's saying, in America at least, whenever we did learn about Indigenous people, we didn't learn about them much, but we always learned about them in the past tense. And Belcourt is saying like what it's like to live and grow up in that sort of environment where you're only afforded a past and you're not talked about in the present or even the future, and how that can really affect you. And it was just one of those books where I learned a lot about someone else's experience, and it gave me insight into another experience in a really good first-hand way. Yeah, just an excellent book. I think if you like authors like Ocean Vuong, then this book will also appeal to you, talking about similar sort of things and also just great writing throughout it. One quick disclaimer though on the writing is that it starts off pretty academic and cerebral, and there are parts of that also sprinkled elsewhere throughout the book. I didn't love those sections because honestly they were a little bit hard for me to understand, and I don't want people to pick this up and think it's going to be an easy read, even though it is pretty short. There's a lot packed into here, and I don't say that to discourage you from reading it, just to encourage you to read it at the right time when you're in the right like headspace and mental space for it. The last nonfiction book on my list is Still Life with Oysters and Lemon by Mark Doty. So this book basically starts by him describing his favorite painting, which is called Still Life with Oysters and Lemon, and what he says about it is just kind of indicative of the book itself. He says when he's looking at it, "The result of looking and looking into its brimming surface as long as I could is love. by which I mean a sense of tenderness towards experience, of being held within an intimacy with the things of the world. He uses talking about his favorite painting and looking at it as a jumping off point for the things that we see and what catches our attention. Essentially, he's saying like how the things we see, what we notice, what we look at, and what we love, those are indicative more of ourselves and who we are than the thing itself. It's just such a lovely little book. The way he talks about his own experiences and how that kind of informs what he likes and what he enjoys, and just making these little connections without saying explicitly like point A to point B, like this influenced this. It's just kind of his thoughts and how he feels that these connections are being drawn. It's really beautiful. If you like any type of art, if that's a painting, a sculpture, a song, anything, any type of work of art that you have a strong connection to, or just are interested in like objects and how they affect our lives, then I think you would really like this one. And when I read this, it was immediate 5 stars for me. One of my favorite books of all time now, for sure. Moving on to my next category, which is probably my favorite, and that is poetry. The collection that stuck out to me the most this year was Guillotine by Eduardo C. Corral. This collection talks about being gay, being Latino, that complex intersection, also the Mexican-American border, and bodies as borders and the restrictions that we place on bodies. And it's doing this all while combining English and Spanish seamlessly and really beautifully in really great, unique ways. He also kind of plays around a lot with just the look of words, the words on the page. So let me see if I can find an example. Like this one, he's kind of really just mixing like visual art along with poetry too, which I find really interesting. Yeah, it's just a great collection. I think if you like poets kind of like Richard Zeichen that feel a little bit oppressive and heavy, but the writing's beautiful and you can't help but be pulled along with the speaker, then this one would be really good too. A note on the Spanish: I have a high school level skill amount of Spanish, which is not a lot, but I was able to read these poems, so don't be too intimidated if you pick it up. Most of the Spanish is concentrated in the first section of the book, and as you keep reading it kind of like peters out a little bit. I had to look up a few words obviously, but I think that made me slow down and really appreciate the poems too for what they are. So even if you are not a fluent Spanish speaker, you can still definitely enjoy this collection. Right, moving on to the second to last category, YA or young adult. The book I chose for this category is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is a YA like retelling essentially of the Shakespeare play Romeo and Juliet, but it's set in 1920s Shanghai. So when the story begins, we see Juliet Kai coming back to Shanghai after a few years of being abroad in America. She coming back to a changed city though. She is the heir of the Scarlet Gang, which is one of the main gangs that rules the city in Shanghai, and she has to come back and deal with the White Flowers, who are the rival gang, and the heir to the White Flowers, who is Roma Montgov and also happens to be her ex-boyfriend. Meanwhile, she's kind of parsing through all of that. There is also a lot of new foreign influences in the city, a lot of Western influences, colonizers essentially trying to take over the city, and there is a monster ravaging the streets as well, and a deadly plague that is sweeping the city. So much is going on, and through it all, Juliet decides that she's going to have to work together with Roma if they are to save the city and the people that they love. But ultimately, of course, they, through working together, start to rekindle their feelings for each other too. So I thought this book was really fun because it was such a unique take on the original story, and I don't like the original story that much. I thought Romeo and Juliet were quite stupid, but seeing and reading this book and seeing the characters and the unique world that's built out, I actually really cared about Juliet and Roma, and especially Benedict and Marshall. Like Benedict and I forget his like name in the actual play, but they were so good too because there's just like that yearning element that I love. So yeah, super fun, quick, like fast-paced plot. It's a good easy read and is super interesting and semi-based in history too, which is really fun. Okay, now for the final category, and that is manga. I read a ton of manga this year, so it was really hard to narrow it down, but I ended up picking two. So the first one is Orange by Ichigo Takano. This is a classic shoujo manga that I only just got around to reading this year, and you can tell it's like pretty classic just from the art style. Like, they have those really big eyes, which is like kind of funny but also super cute. But the story begins when Naho, who is a 16-year-old, she gets this letter from her future self that says, "Here are a million things you have to do each day in order to prevent something terrible from happening." And Naho thinks it's like a practical joke. She doesn't know whether to believe it, so she just kind of forgets about it for a while. But eventually the things that are listed in the letter start happening in her real life exactly as predicted. And she thinks, okay, like maybe I should listen to this. So she starts following the advice of the letter, and basically she's just trying to do the best that she can, following the instructions of this letter to prevent something bad from happening, while also trying to live in the moment and make her own choices for herself. The story ultimately follows her and a group of 6 friends as they're students, high school students, and also as adults, and trying to just kind of grapple with what they've done, their choices that they made, the many regrets that they have, and if they can ever do anything to kind of go back in time and change things so that they lessen their regrets and prevent this terrible event from occurring. What I really liked about this story is the way that it talks about the choices that we make and regrets. There is a large trigger warning for suicide. And whenever you have a plot that kind of involves time travel and someone attempting to take their own life, I think that it would be very easy to just say, oh, like they are able to go back in time and everything is okay. When obviously you could go back in time, but even if you were able to be in the right place at the right time and you're able to prevent someone from taking their life, you can't stop those thoughts from forming in their head. And even if you do everything right, like everything perfectly, there's just no way to really just like make them happy. There's just no easy way to do that. So this book goes into that complexity and it gives it the depth and treatment it deserves, I think. It also is just talking about like what it means to be a good friend to someone who's going through that, and how, you know, you can just be there for someone. It has a really great group of friends, so if you like seeing a close group of friends like tease each other and like fun of each other but also fully support each other, it has that great element. Is it perfect? Probably not, but it's really tender and close to my heart. Alright, the very last book I'm talking about is the series Wotakoi, Love is Hard for Otaku. This is just a super cute, super fun rom-com slice of life story. It basically follows this woman, Narumi. We meet her on her first day at her new job, and while she's there, she just coincidentally runs into this guy, Hirotaka, and it turns out they were childhood friends, but they kind of lost touch, and now here they are again, chance meeting. They kind of become friends again and recall their good times because they are both super nerds. Narumi is really into like manga, especially like BL, boys love, and Hirotaka is a massive gamer, so they just have a lot in common with having these interests that they're really invested in, that the rest of society is kind of like, that's like kind of stupid, why are you spending so much time on that? But it's just like pure slice of life, and there are 2 other characters who they become friends with in the office, who are kind of in the same space. The one really likes anime and the other one is a famous cosplayer. So it's just really fun to see these adults in their mid-20s navigate office life and also romantic relationships without it being like super deep or heavy. I laughed out loud while reading this. I also cried because like childhood friends to lovers is an ultimate trope for me, and I just love it so much. And I ended up buying the whole series that's translated in English right now because I just loved it so much. Like, everyone is so cute in it. And also a note on manga, you can always read like scanlations online, so you don't have to buy them if you can't find them near you, or just want to like test it out if you like it. But yeah, this was super great. I've already reread this volume a few times, and I'll probably just keep rereading it because it's super fun. Okay, and so with that, that is the end of my top 10 books list of 2021. I hope you found something that was at least sort of interesting for you and gives you something to look forward to on your next trip to the bookstore. If you have already read any of the books I mentioned or plan to read any of them, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below and we can have a fun little chat about them. You can also find me on Goodreads at goodreads.com/eggmama and on Twitter at eggmamareads. But yeah, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely day. Bye!